in two parts. One is extending the sunset from last year to allow people eligibility when they voluntarily quit for a good cause related to COVID. That expires on March 31st. We're looking to extend it to a month to 3 months past the lifting of the emergency order. At the same time, we're leaving chargeability for employers for those leaves. And in there is the thing where we've had the most challenges. What kind of responsibility should the employer have to at least offer a job back to the worker? That was a requirement for layoff situations. The department has run into a lot of administrative difficulty in following the law there. We're inclined to repeal that, let them off the hook. But at the same time, going forward, the department says they can cover that, and we'd like that at least offer to be made to workers, both if they were laid off or if they quit for COVID-related reasons. It's not a mandate, but it might affect their experience rating if they choose not to make the offer. So that's one half of the bill. The other half of the bill deals with the administration's request for charge relief. They want charge relief in terms of freezing the rate category, the 1 to 5 thing. We're at rate 1 now, scheduled to go to 5 on July 1st. And they want to freeze that for a year and stay at rate 1. And I do have, Damien will have for us, for the first time in her favorite living room, a presentation of the famous chart that how you calculate benefits. I think things will become a lot clearer to you there. So they want to freeze it for 1 year, and then in the following and into the future, I guess, indefinitely. They don't want to ever see the rate category change by more than 2 categories in any single year. I and several other members of the committee say at the same time, given that we see projections for, and you'll see these today, in the out years of $1 billion for this fund, we think now is the appropriate time to balance those rate reliefs with in helping businesses to also help workers who were adversely affected and laid off during this pandemic. So that is probably a 7-minute summary of where we are. And given that I don't see anybody other than, let's say, I think, Bill, you were our first witness. Does that give you enough to work with?
Yeah, sure, Mr. Chairman, I can work with that. You want to just get right into it?
Sure.
All right. Well, thanks very much for the opportunity to come back and talk to the committee. For the record, William Driscoll with Associated Industries of Vermont. So just sort of touch upon, I guess, three issues here with regard to sort of the original focus of S10 with extending provisions and modifying the charge forgiveness. As I laid out last time I spoke to you folks, on principle, we think that charging experience forgiveness should be based on the reasons for the layoff, not whether or not the to be hired. Not that that's not an important goal, but to the extent that you go down that path, we asked for some flexibility in providing reasonable circumstances for not offering a position. I suspect and hope that the language in the bill is flexible enough for the department to provide for reasonable circumstances. The most classic example would be the fact that an employer simply has not returned to full strength. I would think that would be sufficient. The reference to 30 days for an offer, I don't know how that relates necessarily to company circumstances. That may or may not be reasonable. Again, to the extent that you do have that reasonable test for the department to consider, that may address that issue. The only other technical question I had there, and I would defer to what the department might think about this, is, I know there's language in the most recent proposal that I saw that I think Mr. Chairman is trying to address due diligence on the part of the department in terms of investigating potential circumstances where an employer does not rehire somebody without necessarily a good reason. And I just raised the possibility that the wording of that, where I think it says that the department shall investigate, any allegation. I wonder if that is too sensitive a trigger that the department might end up having to investigate circumstances which on its face don't necessarily seem credible. That could be an administrative issue. But again, I just raised that as something. It would be good to get the perspective of the department on that, and I would defer to their judgment as to whether that's an issue.
Can I interrupt for a second, Bill? Because I think you raise excellent points. I agree with them. I think the way the bill is drafted is we sort of have said this situation about offering the job back becomes very fact specific and fact dependent, and we're going into a rabbit hole if we try and design exactly all the circumstances that could occur. So the way it's drafted is this is what we're trying to achieve. Come back to us by, I think it's April 15th, with procedures or guardrails or guidelines as to how you're going to implement it. So leave it to the experts to think of these scenarios and come up with methodology. If they overstep their bounds, in our opinion, we'll still have time to tell them that before it goes into effect. So I think that's a prudent way to approach it. And I hear you on the last point. The reason why we wanted them, we didn't want, if there becomes a point where somebody is raising it, it should be looked into, as opposed to potentially the department being in a position where they say, nah, that person's a gadfly. I'm not going to spend any time on that. And to the extent they look into it, it may be very small, but at least give it a quick look and see. So so I interrupted you, but I just wanted to confirm that where you were going is not different from where the committee is, I think.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So now we've got the difficult part of the bill out of the way, we can get to the super easy part, right? What to do about taxes and benefits.
Sorry, Bill, before you start, somebody's not muted and there's some background noise. So I just, but anyway.
Okay. Well, hopefully it's not coming from me. I don't think it is, but so the issue of what to do with taxes and benefits going forward. This is this is a very important topic. It's something that the responsible stewardship of the trust fund is something that we as an organization have taken very seriously over the decades. And I've been involved with it a lot myself. The chairman and I were both in rooms for many hours trying to work on the reforms in 2010 to sort of restore the trust fund and try to set it on a good path going forward. And I think a lot of those, obviously that experience has been brought up a bit in this day now in terms of where we want to go. And I think it's important to sort of start off with kind of explaining what the underlying principles of the UI system are when it comes to benefits and taxes, because I think the grand bargain and other things like that were terms that were used in the 2010 experience. Sometimes I think they might be slightly misunderstood and how they might be applied here. The fundamental relationship between benefits and taxes in the UI system really comes down to the fact that benefits should be fair, reasonable, and affordable. And that should drive what taxes are in terms of the taxes should be enough to cover those benefits and provide a reasonable, affordable reserve and not be excessive, not exceed beyond that. It is not a reciprocal relationship in the sense that if taxes go up or down, that simply that fact should drive benefits up or down. And if taxes are excessive, they should be reduced, and that shouldn't be seen as a boon to employers. You're simply not taxing them more than you need to pay for the system that they are supporting. So keeping that in mind when you look at the first question, which is what do we do about the tax shock coming up this July? And a lot of these points were raised by the department last week. I think they did a pretty good job of sort of laying this foundation. But it is important to keep in mind that what's being proposed for the tax schedules and the taxable wage base, it is not net tax relief for employers. It's simply deferring the tax increase that they are still going to have to pay. It's delaying or moderating the impact coming up in the first year or two here. It's simply going to mean that employers are going to have to pay higher taxes for years they would not otherwise have to do because they're putting that off. In fact, I think if you look at the runs that the department made, employers are going to be paying higher taxes for most of the out years, well, through the end of the forecast. In fact, we won't be done paying off that deferral within the forecast. So it's going to be higher taxes for employers for a number of years to come. And that doesn't really create, in many ways, a call or a foundation for doing something to balance that on the benefit side. If you were going to do something analogous to what's being proposed for employers, which is, again, provide some relief or delay in cost today, but they'll have to pay later. The analogy to that on the benefit side would be to increase benefits now, but then take those benefits back away from folks in the out years, whether you do it on an individual basis or you do it collectively by reducing benefit levels in the out years so that you have the increase of benefits now and dip in the out years. That'll be analogous to muting the increase in taxes now, but increasing taxes in the out years. And that would be somewhat analogous or parallel, but I don't think anybody would propose that that's necessarily a good idea to do. It's also important to keep in mind that unlike during the Great Recession, where the pain was shared in recognition of just how big the cost was and that there were contributing factors on both sides. During the Great Recession, benefits were frozen or reduced in various ways temporarily, but that's what happened. That has not happened during this crisis. There has been no reduction in state benefits. In fact, there's been an expansion of eligibility as is being addressed in S10. Work search and other requirements have been relaxed. And there have been substantial federal subsidies on top of state benefits. And I think to keep that scale in mind, even though there's been some interruptions and there's been changes, but just to keep the scale in mind, the maximum state benefit in Vermont is currently $531, maximum weekly benefit. And that's the maximum. So not everybody's making that. Some people are making less than that. So in that context, if you add, $600, $400, even $300 from the federal government on top of that, that is a huge increase in benefits. More than 100% increase in the case of the original 600. So there hasn't been that kind of benefit pain imposed on the unemployed here in Vermont that would call out for an increase in state benefits simply because we are temporarily deferring a tax increase on employers. And in fact, it's important to keep in mind every dollar that you increase benefits on top of what is currently just the state program, that's an additional dollar that employers are going to have to pay in higher taxes going forward. That amount is going to increase the hit to the trust fund, and it will have a corresponding increase to the amount that employers are going to have to pay in higher taxes to restore the trust fund. Now, all of this is stretched out over the forecast, just like everything else, but that is going to be the effect. And so it seems to be counter to the entire purpose of why you're temporarily deferring the tax increase on employers in the first place. And beyond that, there can also be other, technical issues. I mean, if you look at the timeframes that have been discussed, if you try to factor in a benefit increase now, you're getting into a time period where a lot, if not most, of the unemployed are not going to be unemployed because of COVID. And so even that sort of policy rationale as to why you would want higher benefits. is not going to be as applicable as you go, past through to the end of this year and into next year. So we just with regard to that, as we there is not the rational foundation, I guess, in the logic of how the UI system works to justify doing that. And it also does not fit the actual specific proposal that's being put forward for how employer taxes are going to be handled in terms of, again, it's not straight up relief. It's a changing of the schedule or the time frame for paying higher taxes. So we would definitely recommend. I think that the proposal put out by the department, I'm pleasantly surprised that they found that we were healthy enough to afford a more aggressive deferral, if you will, that was originally discussed last year. I think if you look at the numbers in terms of how they forecast it out, I don't think it unreasonably jeopardizes the health of the trust fund in the short term. And I think it looks like we're back to fairly equivalent footing within the forecast, even if we absorb a lower increase in taxes up front from employers. So we are comfortable with the department's proposal on that. We would respectfully argue against having a corresponding increase in benefits. And before I go on to the last issue, which is the long-term health of the trust fund, I'll just stop and see if anybody has any questions or anything on what I've laid out so far. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I think you're muted.
I have a couple. You said you disagree with the corresponding increase in benefits. Do you disagree with any increase in benefits for workers?
Obviously, these systems are complex. There are a lot of different aspects to benefits. I think generally, so is just two. I guess we'll clarify if you're asking in the sense of COVID or in general.
Talking about now in this time and this week of 2021.
Yeah. So I don't see the need insofar as there is federal support and is likely to continue to be federal support on top of benefits going forward. And also, we do have relatively high benefits compared to other states in terms of the baseline. And so we can sort of figure out where things end up specifically with what the federal government might do, but I don't, given how significant that support is, I don't see why additional state fund dollars need to go to benefit increases. So
I guess I just want to, because it's timely and your comments are well taken. I think we get into a dizzy world if we start looking outside in terms of what federal help is. Yes, there has been federal help for workers and increased benefits, extended benefits, but there's also been millions of dollars in relief for employers as well. We did economic recovery grant, PPP. It's just hard to keep track of all the monies that have been flowing both to employers and employees. To segregate out this one area and say workers don't need anymore, I think there's a general acknowledgement that people who have been laid off are facing hard times, and it's hard to say whether the relief they've gotten from one source or another is sufficient. And as far as your point, well, any kind of benefit relief that comes in the next year might not impact COVID people because COVID may or may not be over. Certainly people are going to be feeling the pains of COVID into the future, even though the pandemic has subsided. So it's a tricky area. I hear your points, they're well articulated. I guess I feel that when I look at the chart, I see in the next 2 to 3 years, businesses getting close to $140 million in relief and workers getting nothing. in the projections. And to say that in future years, over 10 years, the employer community may pay that back, I don't necessarily have any faith that we won't come in and tweak this whole chart at some point where the employers will get the benefit now and never do that repayment. And in fact, I think the department has said, and you may agree, that given how the projections play out, and I wish we had that chart up. In fact, can you, Nathan, if you got or Cameron, someone put up the chart that, oh, Matt put up the chart. Matt did a great chart for us. I just got it this morning. I think the department said, based upon the projections now, we should be looking at a commission or something to redesign the structure of contributions and benefits for the long run, because we're collecting too much money and paying out too little, or however you want to say it, and the fund is projected to grow in some ways too healthy. And so what this is, in my mind, what we're doing here is a mini fix until we can do that major fix. And I think what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And I think both the employers and employees should get some relief from the hardships they're facing. Okay, I interrupted you, but I think you had a little bit, you paused. I think you had a little bit more to say.
Yeah, and I kind of want to address that what's the next step point. But I think just to circle back, and I understand the points you're raising, and I understand why they would occur to folks. But I think it's important to keep in mind a couple of things. One, again, yeah, you can get lost in a lot of rabbit holes in trying to compare apples to apples. But I think it's important to keep in mind that yes, there's been significant funding for businesses, but that funding has been to make sure to keep people from getting unemployed in the first place, both in general, but specifically if you look at, for example, PPP, that was directly tied to payroll support to a great extent. So again, that does not create a scale balancing per se, and we say that we don't know exactly what the federal support on top of UI benefits is going to be for sure, but there is going to be some, and it has been extremely significant, and it's likely to continue to be extremely significant. And in a context of where we're trying to provide, even if it's temporary, like this in this case with the UI tax schedule relief, adding extra pressure onto the trust fund in a context of where there is already substantial support for unemployed Vermonters just doesn't appear to us to be the best approach in terms of being sensitive to how we're going to all get out of this economic crisis. And to the larger point, this sort of feeds into the last point, to the extent that there might be long-term fixes to the trust fund that'll change balance fund targets and things like that, and say to come up with a scenario where a lot of this deferred tax relief is not in fact paid in the future. Well, that will only happen if those taxes were in fact not needed, regardless of what changes we make to the overall system. As long as employers are paying enough to cover benefits and provide a reasonable reserve, then they're paying their fair share. They're holding up their end of the system. And if we recognize that a certain level of taxation isn't necessary in the future, then it's simply not necessary. And if employers are not burdened with that additional tax, that's not some sort of boon to them that creates some sort of fairness response in increasing benefits, especially in the context, again, that Vermont is not short shifting on benefits. We have above average maximum weekly benefit. We have definitely above average benefit calculation formula. We don't have a 1 week waiting period. There's not a lot of shortcomings in our UI system. And as long as employers are paying for it, then that's the way the system is supposed to work. And I know it might look like a perception of a windfall, but Simply not overtaxing somebody is not necessarily giving them benefit. It's avoiding doing a harm. And on that, finally, I think there definitely is a need to take that final step in overhauling our system, even if we don't look at our benefit side, which, I mean, I could definitely come up with a short list of reforms on the benefit side. But even if we hold that harmless, we are definitely currently in a high tax situation, and we are looking at a very high tax future. Especially the last decade or so, most years, Vermont has had the single most expensive UI system in the country. Out of the 50 states, Vermont employers have paid the highest tax as a percentage of overall payroll of all the 50 states. I think in 2019, I think we were in fifth place, but every other year, I think in the last 5 or 6 years, we've been the highest. I was looking at the numbers last night, and even years before that, we were traditionally pretty high up there. We got moderated a bit leading into the Great Recession, but we are a very high tax state in terms of UI taxes already. And as the runs show, because we reference our worst year in the last 10 years, and because the COVID impact was such an anomalous and extreme impact, if we don't change how we calculate those taxes, we are definitely going to be collecting way, way more taxes than are needed. And again, I don't think the response to that is just simply to not simply, but to increase benefits just because we're over collecting taxes. I think we need to right size our tax system. And I think perhaps the simplest way to do that would be to simply basically ignore 2020. I think if you take 2020 out of the calculation, and Damien, you can find the statutory reference, but where it says to look at the last 10 years, if you simply have language in there that says except for 2020 or do not include 2020 in those calculations, I think that would go a long way toward adjusting the targets for taxation. Does that need to be done now in this package? Perhaps not. I don't think we'll still be digging out of this hole for a bit. We may not see the full impact of the 2020 reference year really distorting the system, perhaps. And I defer to Matt to give his thoughts on this, but looking at the numbers, maybe 2023, 2024 or so, that's when it's really going to be noticeable that we have more money than we need in the trust fund. Because again, this isn't going to be our last pandemic, but pandemics aren't going to happen on the same frequency as a regular recession. And if you simply excise 2020 from the system, then I think whether it's the next, basically the second highest year for this time frame, might be a reasonable first start. I would certainly welcome a more comprehensive stepping back and let's really look at our taxes and benefits, and see if we have the most fair, reasonable, and affordable system that we can have. But I think that would be a good immediate or sort of not short term, but in a more immediate and simple fix to the larger issue that we're facing in the out years.
Thank you. Very well put. So just let me say a couple of things before we move on to David. I guess the way I view this as we had a grand bargain in 2010, and people signed off on it, and as things evolved, it could play out. There were winners and losers on each side. This is sort of an extreme kind of situation. I think everybody's agreeing that maybe the whole taxation benefit structure is worthy of a review because the numbers are looking, even in the light of the pandemic, they're looking like they're going to be very strong in the out years for a health fund. So I view this as a blip, a tweak of that grand bargain to face the circumstances we're facing. I think it should be, if we're going to do before we do the comprehensive one, if we're going to do a tweak, it should be a balance tweak. And going back to your original statement that businesses are not really doing well under this tweak, because even though they're going to save $140 million in the next 2 or 3 years, over the next 10 years, they're going to wind up paying more. There's nothing to say that we couldn't tweak this further to make sure business don't pay more in those next 10 years. We can do whatever we want. We don't have to be locked into this simple proposal. So those out years where businesses is paying like $10 million more than they would have otherwise paid, we can say they will pay no more than they otherwise would have paid, so that they keep that $130 million and don't have to repay it back. I think, that's something we can do. But in terms of an immediate fix, if we're going to change the grand bargain, we should do it equitably, or we can do nothing. We'll just stick with the grand bargain, give no tax relief and no benefit changes. It wouldn't be the end of the world. So that's the other choice we have before us. So with that, I'd like to move on to David Mickenberg, because we're all kind of running slow on time.
Thank you. And I just have some brief remarks on S10, the first half of the bill as you framed it. And then I have some formal remarks that I want to read into the record, and I will send you also on the second part. We're comfortable, David Mickenberg here on behalf of Working Vermont and the Vermont Building and Construction Trades Council. And we're comfortable with the direction of the committee related to the job offer issue that you raised earlier in the committee. I think it's reasonable. I'm disappointed that the department was unable to enforce the law last year, but understand the circumstances and are comfortable with the direction of the committee on that particular issue and that part of S10, and would also support the extension of S10. So now to the larger issues that Bill was speaking to and that the chair framed earlier. I do think it's important to frame for a moment, to revisit for a moment the 2010 grand bargain that's been referenced and the principles behind it. In 2010, like now, we found ourselves in serious economic difficulty. And at that time, our UI trust fund was in dire straits. And at the time, the legislature, the administration, interested stakeholders came to a common solution that felt fair for all. Both sides of the equation, the employers and the workers, shared in the pain and the gain. Now, I could argue that for a person trying to live on UI at about 50% of their regular salary, trying to feed their family, trying to pay their rent, their car loan, student debt, the pain was felt much more acutely for workers. But despite that fact, the labor community came to the table and was willing to absorb that pain for the greater good. Today, we find ourselves in an unprecedented time in which our economy, despite the gains in the stock market for those lucky enough to own stocks, and the many businesses, including in our state, that have actually thrived in the pandemic, our economy is in serious trouble, especially for low-paid workers. Uncertainty about the future is everywhere for working Vermonters. Daily struggles to maintain their lives are real and serious. And today we're revisiting how to utilize future trust fund dollars, with the administration providing employers with tens of millions of dollars in tax benefits. Yet we don't see any proposal or support from the administration or others now to balance that gain. And in fact, they cannot support one single dime in additional benefits for employees, which is hardly in the spirit of the 2010 grand bargain. It's been intimated by the department and others that those on UI have gotten enough support through enhanced federal benefits. But for the vast majority of workers, even with that additional support, which I might add has been reduced by 50% from previous augmented federal benefits, it is often barely enough to survive. One article that just came out said, and I'll quote, "One long-term consequence of insufficient access to UI payments is an increase in food insecurity. The number of families experiencing food insecurity has soared since the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic. And there are clear racial disparities when it comes to families, to which families are more likely to lack adequate food access to food." Another study that just came out today said that, quote, "Full-time minimum wage workers cannot afford a 2-bedroom rental anywhere in the US and cannot afford a 1-bedroom rental in 95% of US counties, according to the National Low Income Housing Coalition's annual Out of Reach report. And in fact, the average minimum wage worker in the US would need to work almost 97 hours per week to afford a fair market rate 2-bedroom and 79 hours per week to afford a 1-bedroom. Whatever additional UI benefits recipients have received pales in comparison to the billions of dollars that employers in Vermont have received in state and federal assistance. In fact, just this week, the House is passing a supplemental employer assistance bill to the tune of $10 million for businesses that started their businesses during the pandemic. And we anticipate another round of PPP money, as well as additional federal dollars flowing to states which will undoubtedly be used to provide further no strings attached assistance to our employer community. Employers in Vermont have already received billions of dollars in government assistance, with more on the way. I was particularly disheartened to hear the commissioner's testimony last week with regards to the mention of adding benefits to the mention of adding to the benefits employees get. It was particularly disturbing that during the economic crisis, in which 73% of Vermonters receiving UI are women, that the commissioner would dismiss out of hand the notion of establishing a dependent benefit, for example, similar to those that in states across New England and other parts of the country. I have serious questions, and this is a really important point, as to how the department was able to process the federal benefits and annual fluctuations in Vermont's UI benefits as described in earlier testimony from the department. And yet the system is incapable of processing any possible enhancement to UI benefits, particularly called out by the commissioner, dependent benefits. I know, and I've spoken to other heads of UI divisions around the country, that there are outdated computer systems across the country. And yet 13 other states have been able to modify their benefit systems to account for dependent benefits, for example, and other benefit enhancements, including 3 New England states, Maine, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. Maine, for example, is currently considering an increase in their dependent benefit. I also wanted to reflect on the extent to which I see benefit enhancements as an issue which has profound impacts on all working poor folks, but particularly women and BIPOC folks. Studies have shown that women typically receive lower UI benefits because of occupational segregation, and Black and Latinx women are paid even less because of systematic racism. Your economist, Tom Kivett, presentation to the legislature earlier this year, in that presentation, he pointed out that on the list of, quote, losers, that's what his list, in the COVID world, women largely, and this is his quote, who have service jobs and dependent children are home are among that list of losers. In a recent report by the Center for American Progress, they stated that the push of job losses combined with the pull of increased caregiving at home has created a recession in which more women have been affected, leading Dr. C. Nicole Mason to dub it the first ever she session. In preparing my testimony today, I was reminded of what Senator Balance said to the Working Vermonters Caucus earlier in the year, challenging those of us in the labor community to look at labor issues through a new lens that we often had not. A lens which takes into the account the impact of the policy we advocate for on particular groups that we may not have considered with such focus previously. Well, we are at that moment today, and the needs of the working women and men of Vermont must not be pushed aside in the name of administrative convenience or a commitment to the failed trickle-down economic theory that the department seems to be espousing today. These women and men are suffering just like those trying to keep their businesses afloat and deserve equal attention as you adopt policies to address these struggles. From my perspective, if we're talking about $50 million of potential benefits or $140 million of potential benefits, the spirit of the grand bargain necessitates that we look at equal distribution of that gain to employers and employees. And at a minimum, Vermont's labor community cannot support any policy which doesn't provide support for those that are struggling to keep their heads above water. In addition to the suggestion of broad-based general benefit enhancements, which we support, We would be particularly open to discussing an ongoing dependent benefit, which allows those most impacted by economic hardship of the current moment to have some source of additional support that was needed before the crisis and will be needed after. Thanks for listening to my sort of prepared remarks. I'm happy to talk in addition to those and answer any questions you may have.
Does anybody have any questions for either Bill or David at this point? Senator Rob, excuse me, I sneeze. Go ahead.
Bless you in advance. Bill, I really sort of lost track when you said it's analogous, giving people more benefits now and increasing the rate until we can drop it again. You said was somehow analogous to increasing. I didn't understand what was analogous in what you were saying.
Sure, yeah, and I apologize if I wasn't very clear. I was just trying to make the point that if you're trying to propose doing something analogous or parallel on the benefit side to what is being proposed on the tax side, you're paying less taxes now and more taxes later. So you're getting a relief, I suppose, up front, but then you're paying for it down the road. If you were going to do something analogous with this benefit proposal, where basically it evens out over time, you get something now, but you pay for it later. The analogy would be, if you're really being parallel, is if you want to increase benefits now, you need to take that money back again down the road so that you do have that even out. So you benefit today, but you pay tomorrow. For employers, that's lower taxes today, higher taxes tomorrow. For beneficiaries, that's higher benefits now, lower benefits tomorrow. That would be analogous. And I'm not proposing you do that, but I'm just saying that that's kind of illustrating how what's being proposed on the benefit side is not really analogous to what's being proposed on the tax side. And again, I think it's worth stating again that the grand bargain does not apply here. With all due respect, the grand bargain was sharing the pain to dig out of the Great Recession. There has been no shared pain in that same sense here, because benefits have not been reduced in this recession like they were temporarily in the last one. So to say that there's a grand bargain reason to increase benefits because we're deferring tax increases, it does not apply. It's not factually correct or logically correct for what happened in the Great Recession and what's happening now. I understand the initial gut response that sounds right, but in reality, it does not apply.
Well, I guess I would just say very, very briefly that we're all in pain here, and we have what is projected to be a very healthy fund. So we can make some tweaks to that fund to help both sides of the equation. So to the extent we're giving some relief to the business community from what's in law, let's give some relief to the workers in terms of what their needs are on the street. So in any event, let's go on to, unless there are other questions, let's go on to Mr. Martin. Charles, how are you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm joined by Leo O'Reilly today, and he's going to kind of elaborate on some of the points that I make. For the record, Charles Martin, Vermont Chamber of Commerce.
Okay.
I just want to thank the committee for all of their work and their work with the department to define and address the issues that S10 tries to cover. I'm going to avoid sort of a tit for tat on employer and employee relief. I will say, because I think it's germane given the previous testimony, that the people I work with are employers, and a lot of those people their entire life's work is unraveling around them on a daily basis. In some instances, their businesses are disappearing. They're having to furlough employees because of financial necessity. And in many instances, their business is their household income. So I think that is worth mentioning here. And those are the people that I have front of mind when I speak to committees on relief right now. And I'll also add that the gap funding advance in the House was specifically designed to service populations that were marginalized in previous relief packages. So that money is intended to fit those businesses that don't fit traditional molds and may not be as active in the legal space as other businesses who were able to access relief funds more easily previously. That said, back to S10. We're supportive of the extension of a relief of charges. I think Leo will expand on this, but I will add that it can be logistically challenging in some instances to demonstrate that offer of rehire, that those reasons can vary widely from people relocating or taking other jobs or refusing to be compliant with COVID-19 measures. There's a whole host of reasons for why people have had trouble in the past for not being able to successfully conduct a rehire offer. I'll also say that I'm interested in, and Leo will add to this as well, the June 1st timeline for the application development. I recognize that there's the April 15th employer advisory component. So maybe that's when employers will receive the information that they need to help prepare those applications in the event they need to create that application. Onto the schedule and wage-based component, we definitely support the department's proposal to freeze the tax rate schedule at Schedule 1 and freeze the taxable wage base where it is. That would definitely provide temporary short-term liquidity to employers, and I think it would help folks get through this pandemic. I'll echo a lot of Bill's comments there on some of the other content, and we'll also just reiterate that this isn't complete relief of charges, that employers will have to pay this back. But we're thankful that the direction is providing short-term immediate relief now. I'm going to hand it off to Leo, who can kind of elaborate on some of the logistical aspects of what I just mentioned.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Charles. Go ahead, Michael.
Well, go ahead. I do have some technical questions for you that I think are relevant. But why don't you give your presentation and I'll fill in the blanks.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thanks to the committee for allowing us to testify today. My name is Leo O'Reilly. I'm an accountant in South Burlington. I work primarily with businesses in the hospitality industry, and primarily local area restaurants, and work on behalf of the Vermont Chamber and the Vermont Independent Restaurant Coalition. So those are our clients. Those are the people that we're kind of looking at when it comes to UI. We've counseled them on how to manage their UI accounts for many years, and how to in an industry that's challenging. It has a lot of systemic turnover because of seasonality and what have you, and I think we've done a good job of helping them kind of guide through how to manage their UI experience rating, which is a significant expense. As outlined by Bill, that we have one of the highest in the country. Individual claims can have a dramatic impact on your UI rating and then your taxes going forward. And we'll talk about that maybe a little bit towards the end.
Can I interrupt for 1 second?
Sure.
Could Damien or Cameron or Matt, could you pull up on our screen the chart? Because I think Leo's testimony could be relevant to this that Matt sent us this morning.
Yeah, I can pull that up. I'm sorry, I can pull that up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So, and as Charles had said, the thing that we've been looking toward ever since Act 90 came out last spring was that there would be an ability for employers who could not get back to full operations, which all of our clients are in that position. None of them have nearly the sales that they've had at this time last year, or certainly in 2019. Is that there would be an ability to have rate relief until they could get back to full operations. And we feel like that this bill is there to accomplish that. And we were very pleasantly surprised that that we knew the department was going to support that, and we're very happy that the committee is looking to support that. I think the way we look at it is is that the devil's in the details on how these things will be logistically operated. So it's getting definitions of things, such as, what is it, how, when would an offer have to be made? We don't have a client in our client base who would not like to get back to the number of employees that they had in 2019. They've all worked hard to be, they're all independent businesses. They're all lifelong, Vermonters. They're trying to support the Vermont economy, trying to provide really good businesses with good wages in an industry that's has challenges in that regard. So there's not one that wouldn't want to get back to the employee base that they had before and make those offers of employment.
Do you have a, I mean, I'd like to go beyond this issue, which we've gone around and round on for a while. It sounds like we're coming to some consensus
resolution. Yep.
I mean, I think what we are offering, I think, is very reasonable.
Yep.
Right now, the department, if we wanted to follow existing law, would have to unravel every single one of your clients and see if they made a job offer in 2020 to determine their experience rating. We're saying, even though ignorance is no excuse of not following the law, we're going to let that go and retroactively repeal that section. But we want the policy going forward to be in effect to try and pair people back with their jobs. We're also saying we realize that it's very circumstantial when it's reasonable or not reasonable to offer the job back. So we're leaving the details to the department to come back to us with procedures of how they best see doing that. I'm not sure what you're suggesting here. You want us to abandon that idea altogether?
No. What I think I'm suggesting, just to add clarity, is that it's going to come down to the process. So on April 15th, we're going to there's going to be this report to the committee that says, well, here's going to be the process. Here are going to be the forms. Here's what employees and employers are going to have to provide to adjudicate that claim and have them relieved. And I guess I'm very concerned about how that process is going to go and what's going to be necessary for the employers to produce, because in this industry specifically, there's a pool of employees, typically, especially on the server side. And we've run into this with the department already, where we've tried to prove that we've made offers of employment, and they've come back and said, no, it's not sufficient because you made an offer. Because what employees will do and employers will do is go to their pool. They have 25 servers who are qualified to work. They have 5 shifts available. Whoever picks up on the shift is going to get the shift. And we're not saying, John, you have an offer, and Jane, you have an offer, and Sam, you have an offer. That's just not the way the industry is structured. So there is concern over, what is going to be looked at as a valid offer. When would that offer have to be made to relieve the claim? And so it really comes down to those logistics, because we don't see, that these clients are going to get back to their pre-COVID sales until the summer of 2022.
Well, they don't. Well, certainly, if they don't have a job to offer, they don't have to make the job offer. But a lot of unemployment, as you know, comes fact specific. If the employer and employee can't agree whether it was a quit based upon misconduct or a firing based upon misconduct or a voluntary quit attributable to the actions of the employer, those things get adjudicated. I mean, the vast majority of them will be pretty straightforward, but there will be ones that people will disagree. But the things you're talking about now is the rabbit hole I found myself going down and trying to put this in statute. So I said, let the department give it some time over the next few weeks or months and give some examples out there, procedures or guidelines, and that's the best we can do, unless we want to totally give up on the employee right to get the job back or right to get an offer, which I don't want to do. So I hear you, but as opposed to reiterating the
Yeah.
concerns that I share with you. Do you have a better solution?
Well, I think what I would request, I guess there's two things that I would request is one that, we could be involved, Charles and I or whomever, in the, once the documentation is provided from the department in April to say, well, this is a reasonable, pragmatic, a logical solution, or, here are some issues that we see just from a practical standpoint with employers.
Okay.
So that we
what I
could head it off before it's out.
Right. And what I would say is that if I was the department, I would be talking to stakeholders about this before they came out with their guidelines. And you do have a voice through the legislature. If they produce something that you feel is unreasonable, this applies to employees as well, they could come to us and we can comment and use whatever powers we have to say, I mean, we could even tweak the law if we need to, if we say this is unreasonable, this is not what we intended, or this is unfair to business, or this. So it's not like they're going into some star chamber and going to come up with something and nobody's going to know what's going on. So I think I hear you. I think this is sort of the best we can do at this.
Right. Yeah, understood. And then the only other thing that I was going to say is, I'd like to get some idea, and maybe this is not the forum for it, to get an idea of what's going to happen on July 1st, because we have these forms now going out to employers on June 1st. There's no way, and we've seen this during the entirety of the pandemic, that the department is going to be able to, deal with this and make decisions on individual employees for individual employers by July 1st. And does that mean that all these claims will get charged? What's going to happen on July 1st?
Well, could you have a conversation with Cameron about that? And this bill has a ways to go, but my understanding is that, they want to keep up with the chargeability experience rating as they go, but they really don't have to make the final decisions until January 1st in terms of any individual employer as to what the ultimate experience rating and what group they fall into. So they could.
Well, for the 2020 claims, those would have to be adjudicated now.
No, but we're
experience rating.
we're alleviating the 2020 claims.
Okay, got it.
Okay. Let me ask this, because I do want to use your expertise here. Damien, can you put up the rate chart on the screen? I'm just trying to get a handle, Leo, of what we're talking about in rate relief for some sample employers here. And are your clients, Leo, do they generally fall into there's 20 categories. Do they generally fall into the lesser percentages, or are they down towards the bottom? I always thought like construction and manufacturing and those people were sort of more likely to be towards the bottom, but service industries and restaurants don't have really severe experience ratings.
Well, I think it's, client specific. I'd say for the most part, we've done a good job of, maintaining a low experience rating for clients.
Okay, so
they're kind of towards the bottom.
Okay, so
many of them are at the 0.4% right now.
Okay, so if the committee could look at this chart, just so you're grounded in what I know this is weedy, but it's important in this context. So if you look at rate classification 1 on the left, that's somebody who has a low experience rate, has pretty stable employment. Presently, under category 1, which is like the third column over, they are charged 0.5% on the first $14,000 of income of their employee. So that's $70. That's their bill. Okay. If they went to 1.5, that would be a tripling of the rate. They would be charged $210. So what's at stake for that employer in this bill is the difference between 210 and $70, which is $140 times as many employees. So if they have 10 employees, their bill would go up $1,400. Are people with me?
Yep.
I mean, just bring us to.
No, I
bring
don't
us to
see
the
where you
real
are
world.
on this chart. I mean, in all honesty, no, I'm not with
That's
you.
fine. Let's just take a couple of minutes. Okay.
So-
Remember, we were talking about the rate classes on the left, 1 through 20, are representative of how good your experience rating is. So if you have a good experience rating, you're at the top, 0 or 1. Okay. That's
Yeah.
someone who has stable employment, doesn't have a lot of turnover. Okay. On the top, where it says Roman numerals 1 through 5, that's basically dealing with the health of the trust fund. Okay. We
Right.
we have a healthy trust fund. We're at 1, but it's projected because of the pandemic, we're going to quickly jump to 5. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So take the first column, 0. It's easier with doing the first number 1. You see number 1 there?
Yeah.
Presently, an employer in that category is paying 1/2 of 1% on the taxable wage base, which is $14,000. You only pay UI taxes on the taxable wage base, the first $14,000 of income.
Right.
You're saying they're in rate class 1, and then numeral 1.
So it's
Okay.
0.5.
Yeah.
Go across to 1 and 0.5. If we were to go to rate class 5, they'd be pay 1.5% of the first 14,000 as a UI tax. And if you do the math, for every employer who falls into that class 1, they're going to pay $210 more if we don't do anything.
Mhm.
That's what's at stake. And it's going to vary depending upon every employer.
Right. Right.
That's what the relief that that is being asked for. So
So I have like a new question that I haven't thought of before, but maybe I'm just lost. But if, I get that for a lot of businesses, nothing was their fault. They had no control over what kind of business they had and how many people experienced unemployment because they couldn't, they can't go remote or whatever the case may be. But as we freeze the rate for everyone and we come out of that, are businesses punished who, like, are they paying the same rate as someone else who had a lot of people unemployed?
It's an excellent question, but you have to remember all COVID-related layoffs or quits did not impact this chart because there's no experience rating associated with those.
Right.
We lifted that.
Right.
Experience
Okay,
rating.
so we lifted that experience rating, but the other elements of the experience rating.
Right. If we have if there's a slowdown in a business for other reasons, they lay somebody off, they may drop down in this chart and pay a higher percentage.
Okay.
So, so in the example, if we just did nothing and just left this part of the bill because we can't reach an agreement, for instance, or we just don't want to pursue it, then that particular business would suffer $210. They would stay where they were under the law, but they wouldn't get $210 relief per employee as a result of us not doing anything.
What's the distribution of employers by rate class? In other words, how many or what percentage of our total employers are at the bottom rate class as opposed to a somewhat higher category?
That's an excellent question, Senator Brock, and I learned this myself after all these years. Apparently, buried in the law is that you take a snapshot of all the employers in the state, and you basically assign them a rate class by saying the worst 5% go in rate class 20. The next worst 5% go in 19. So every one of these rate classes has 5% of the employers. So that's how that get, and that's why, when we talk about the commissioner corrected me, he said, or no, Matt corrected me in saying, when you talk about non-chargeability for a particular employer for a particular layoff, it doesn't mean the employer community as a whole is saving money. It just gets passed on to another employer because the entire amount has to be distributed among those 20 groups, no matter what. You may find yourself, because you don't have a chargeability, moving up and saving a little bit, but that's somebody else's pain because the whole amount still gets charged. It just gets, somebody else falls back if you move up. So
Two other questions, if I can.
Yep.
The first is, does this mean, based on the 5% per rate class, that if you were looking at what is the average impact of any of this on an employer, if you use rate class 10 to get you that number?
That's what I would do. That I don't. It's probably not scientific,
Yeah.
but I did look at rate class 10. Say that probably is the average Joe out there. And if you use rate class 10, they're going from the relief would be going from projected to be 4.4, and we would keep it at 2.3. So they would be suffering about a 2%
Mhm.
increase in charges, or a doubling of the charges. The one we used before would be a tripling of the charges. This would be a doubling of the charges.
And if we look at rate classes, I always thought that rate class 1 was the lowest, but I see a rate class 0. Is there in fact a rate class 0?
There is.
Well, we have Cameron, I see you there. If you can, we're going to end this pretty soon, but if you have briefly, I probably misstated something, so go ahead.
No, Mr. Chair, I think you actually did a great job. I would just clarify that, when there is a rate class 0, it is at the very bottom, and the vast majority of employers actually live in that class.
So the 5% I said is wrong?
No, sir. The 5% is correct. However, that starts with rate class 1 through 20. If you do not have any charges against your experience rating, essentially, if your experience rating is 0, you live in rate class 0, which is where the majority of employers are. But then, Mr. Chair, everything you said after that was accurate. We then have to split everyone else up by 5% of the total wages across the state.
What percentage of employers are in rate class 0?
Matt is on. He may have that number right off the top, but I'm wanting to say, I know it's over 50%. I'm wanting to say it's somewhere between 50 and 70%. Matt may have it. I know he has this chart, and we can provide that. It's on our LMI website.
God, this whole thing should be blown up.
Yeah.
I agree. I agree with that. Because what ends up happening, if you drop out of that rate class 0, you don't end up going to rate class 1. You end up in rate class 6. So so what ends up happening if these, once these charges start getting applied to employer accounts, is you go from, you went up to rate class, the 5, the rate schedule 5, you'd go from your 0.4%, to 2.7%. You don't end up, if you have claims, any claims charged to your account, because the way it goes once you drop out of rate class 1 is that the rest of the system kind of lacks parity.
Right.
So you don't triple. You go from 0.4 to 3.
Okay.
And then that becomes just an onerous expense at that point.
Okay.
And Cameron's aware of that. That you could have $1,000 claim, and you're going to pay back $7,000-8,000 over 3 years for that one claim.
Mr. Chair, if this is a long answer, I can hear from someone offline, but I just learned that there are people who self-insure on this front. I actually didn't know you could do that. Do we know how many employers self-insure and don't participate in this system?
Well, that was where I started off this morning, and it is a long answer. We need to take a quick look at that. I'm not sure whether self-insure, you mean reimbursable employers where they don't pay anything into the fund, but the fund pays out benefits to their workers, and then the employer gets a bill for 100% of those benefits. And I don't know whether they have any insurance to back that up, or they just pay out of their operating costs, but there is that situation. And we need to talk about that because the federal government did provide some relief at the beginning of COVID where they paid half of the bill for those employers.
Mhm.
I don't know what the status of that is, whether they
Yeah.
want paying more or it continues or what, but I've gotten a question from several legislators about that. So
That
And I
that
think there's
has
only certain
continued
type.
through March.
what's that?
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Uh,
Yeah, and there's only certain types of employers that I think, and Cameron probably could weigh in on this, who qualify to be a reimbursable employer. It's not like every employer can choose to be a reimbursable employer, I don't think.
Senator Rahm, it is a longer discussion, but a very important one.
Yeah.
A lot of nonprofits,
Yeah, nonprofits.
schools, schools maybe even can do that. So I know Damien has a lot of information on that. We'll talk about it at a later date. So I am sorry, but I think we had to do this and I don't know when we're going to get back to this. It sounds like we're pretty close on the first half of
Yeah.
the bill. Whether we go forward on the second half, that remains to be seen. So
Where is this chart on? Is this on our website?
this is actually in the green books, believe it or not.
Oh,
And
you're kidding.
nope. And it's probably now on our webpage, or it could be.
Okay, great. I mean, not that
You're gonna go sleep with it, right?
yeah. This may be the solution to the insomnia of last night.
Okay, let's if everybody's okay, let's take a 5-minute break or till 9. All right, let's go to 9:55.
And Mr. Chair, when we join back up, I'll be on the phone.